The wagon came up Sedge Ridge on a bright cold Saturday morning in November with 9 men riding on it, and Sabra Calderon knew every one of them by name and had fed 6 of them at her own kitchen table. It was the autumn of 1917. The country had been at war since April, and in a hill county in southern Indiana, the war mostly arrived as paper. Cards to sign. Quotas to meet. A column in the Eubank Sentinel every Thursday listing who in each township had subscribed to the loan and who had not, printed in a type just large enough that a man could read his own absence from across the room. But on that particular Saturday, the war arrived as a farm wagon with the sideboards on and 9 men sitting up in it with their coat collars turned against the wind, and it came for her mill. The County Council of Defense had a scrap iron committee. The Scrap Iron Committee had a chairman named Harlan Frisbee, who sold insurance and buggies at Eubank, and who had never in the whole of his life been so thoroughly useful, and the committee had spent 6 weeks driving the 11 townships and making a list of every piece of dead iron in the county. Broken mowers, cracked kettles, the wreck of a threshing machine that had sat in the same fence row since the year the courthouse burned. Iron was the war. Everybody said so, and every pound of it lying idle in a weed patch was a pound the government did not have. Number 41 on Harlan Frisbee's list was a 3-roller cast iron cane mill standing under a shake roof on the south side of Sabra Coldiron's barn lot, with a sweep pole leaned against the wall beside it, and a rock furnace and a sheet iron evaporating pan sitting 20 steps away under the same roof. She was at the woodpile when they came up the lane, and she set the axe down in the block and walked out to meet them and did not go in the house for a shawl, and that was the first thing several of the men noticed and mentioned afterward. She was 63 that November. A tall woman, wide across the shoulders in the way of a woman who has carried things a long distance for a long time. Silver gray hair pinned up in a low knot that never in anybody's memory came down. A long face, brown as a saddle from the eyes down to the collar, and white as paper above the hat line. Pale gray eyes that did not blink much. She wore a dark blue calico work dress that had been washed past its color, with the sleeves turned back above the elbow even in a cold wind, and a long apron of heavy gray sacking, and black laced work shoes with the toes cut square by rocks. Harlan Frisbee got down and shook her hand and told her what a fine thing the county was doing. "Mrs. Coldiron," he said, "we have got 11-ton pledged out of Otter Fork Township alone. We are after the mill." She looked past him at the wagon and counted the men on it without appearing to. "It is not dead iron," she said. Frisbee had a way of tipping his head when he was being patient. "There is not another cane mill turning in this county," he said. "There has not been syrup made on this ridge but by you since Ollie Trabue's father quit in 1905. I have got that from 4 different men." "Then you have got it right," she said. "There is not another one turning. That is exactly why this one is not going on your wagon." There was a silence of the kind that happens in a barn lot when 9 men are all thinking the same thing and none of them wants to be the one who says it out loud. It was Gib Naylor who said it. Naylor farmed 320 acres of the best bottom in the township, tomatoes on contract to the cannery at Eubank and corn behind them. And he had grubbed out his own father's cane patch with a team and a stump puller in 1904, and had told the story at every hog killing since as an example of a man knowing when a thing was over. "Sabra," he said, "you make $60 worth of molasses a year off 4 acres of ground and a month of your life. Sugar is 6 cents a pound at Trabue's store. You can buy a barrel of it. There is nobody left in this county that wants sorghum but old men and their memories." 6 cents, she said. 6 cents, said Naylor. She nodded once, the way you nod at a thing you have decided not to argue with, and she looked at Harlan Frisbee and told him he could have the mower frame out of the fence row and a cracked kettle and about 90 feet of old cable off the well rig, and that the men were welcome to load it themselves, and that there was coffee on the back of the stove and they could have that too, and that the mill was staying where it was. They loaded the mower frame. They drank the coffee, all 9 of them, standing in the yard with their hats off. And when the wagon went back down the lane, Gib Naylor said the thing that went around the township and stuck to her for the next 14 months, and it stuck. Because it was funny, and because everybody in 9 miles believed it. She is the last woman in Indiana, Naylor said, still boiling molasses for a country that quit eating it. Down at the mouth of her lane, where the ridge road bent past the schoolhouse, 3 men stood in the sun with their arms folded and watched the wagon come out. Because a committee wagon in a woman's lane was news, and news in a hill township in November is nearly the whole of the entertainment. Ollie Trabu, who kept the general store at Eubank and who sold sugar out of a barrel with a scoop and knew what every family in 4 townships put in their coffee. Gib Naylor, riding on the wagon but leaning out to talk to them. And Dr. Emmett Sly, who had delivered 1/3 of the county and who had lately been made the food administrator for it. A job he had accepted, because nobody else would, and which so far had consisted of nailing up posters. That was the 9th of November, 1917. To understand why 9 men thought a cane mill was scrap, you have to understand what had happened to sweetness in America in the 30 years before that morning, because it happened everywhere, and it happened quietly, and by 1917 almost nobody could remember it happening at all. When Sabra Cold Iron came onto that ridge as a bride in 1874. There was a cane patch on nearly every farm in the county, and there were 19 mills turning in the 11 townships. Sorghum was not a quaint thing then. It was sweetness, and sweetness was a thing a family had to produce or do without, the same as meat or soap or a pair of shoes. Refined white sugar came from Louisiana or from Cuba by boat and by rail, and it cost 11 and 12 cents a pound in a hill county, and a hill county did not have 11 cents a pound. So a man planted 4 acres of cane in the corner of a field, and in September the whole neighborhood turned out, and the boiling ran day and night for 3 weeks. And every household on that road went into winter with 30 or 40 gallons of syrup in the cellar and used it in everything, on biscuits, in cake, in pies, in coffee, poured over cornbread, cooked into apple butter. Traded at the store for shoes. And then the price of refined sugar came down. It came down steadily for 30 years, on better boats and cheaper cane, and beet sugar out of Michigan and Colorado, and a tariff that moved and moved again, and by the turn of the century, a 100-pound sack of granulated sugar could be laid on a farm wagon at Eubank for less than $5.50. 5.5 cents a pound, white as a snowbank, no flavor in it at all, which was exactly what people had come to want, because a syrup tastes like something and sugar tastes like nothing, and nothing is easier to cook with. The 19 mills went one at a time. A man would skip a year because he was short of help, and skip the second year because he had skipped the first. And the third year he would sell the rollers to a junk man for the weight of them and put the ground into corn. By 19 and 5 there were 4 mills in the county. By 19 and 9 there were 2. By 1912 there was one, and it was on Sedge Ridge under a shake roof on the south side of a barn lot, and the woman who owned it turned it every single September, whether anybody helped her or not. The arithmetic against her was simple, and everybody could do it, and Ollie Trabu at the store did it out loud whether a customer asked him to or not, because it flattered him to be the man who understood the modern world. An acre of cane, Trabu would say, laying it out on the counter with his finger. Say 140 gallons if the season is right and you do not lose the middle of it to a wet week. Say she gets 40 cents the gallon, which is what she gets, because that is what I pay her for the 8 or 9 gallons I take. $56 an acre. And to get it, she has to plant it, hoe it twice, strip every stalk by hand with a paddle, cut every stalk by hand with a knife, haul it, grind it, and stand over a boiling pan for 11 hours a day for 3 weeks with a skimmer in her hand. That same acre in tomatoes on a cannery contract is $60, and the cannery sends a truck. And I will sell you all the sugar you want for 5.5 cents, and you can stay in the house. He was not lying. Every figure in it was correct. That is the thing about the arithmetic that runs a county. It is almost always correct. And it is correct every year, and a system that is correct every single year for 30 years does not merely become the way things are done. It becomes a kind of eyesight. After 30 years, the people inside it cannot see the shape of the thing anymore, because they are looking through it. Sabra Cold Iron farmed 180 acres on the top and the north slope of Sedge Ridge, and 130 of it was in corn and wheat and clover and pasture, and was farmed no better and no worse than her neighbors farmed theirs, and about that ground she never had an argument with anybody. It was the 6 acres in the southeast corner on the warm, well-drained bench above the spring that had been putting a burr under the saddle of Otter Fork Township since the second Cleveland administration. 6 acres in cane. The same 6 acres in cane every year since 1874. Her husband was Ephraim Colderon, and he died of a bad heart in the spring of 19 and 3 at 54 years of age. And after that she farmed it with hired help and with a neighbor boy grown into a neighbor man, Curtis Ammerman, who came up from the next place with a team 3 days a week for a wage and for a share of the syrup. Her daughter Vesta had married a man in the freight office at Indianapolis and wrote twice a month, and 11 of those letters over the years had contained, in one form of words or another, the suggestion that her mother sell the ridge and come to town. The neighbors did not put it in letters. They put it to her face at the store and at the church and across the fence, kindly enough most of the time, because they liked her, and a man can like a woman very much and still consider her a fool. Sabra, put that bench in corn. Put it in tomatoes. Sell Frisbee the mill and take the $12. She had one answer, and she had been giving it in the same words for so many years that men could say it along with her, and sometimes did. Everything in this county that anybody eats, she said, comes here on a train. If the train quits, the county quits. I would like to have one sweet thing on this place that does not come on a train. That was the public answer, and it was true as far as it went, and men heard it as an old woman's stubbornness dressed up in a sentence. There was a second answer, and only 2 people had ever heard it, and one of them had been dead since 1911. In the winter of 1894, there was no money in that county. Not little money, none. The panic had come the summer before, and the bank at Eubank had shut its doors for 9 days and opened them again a smaller thing, and corn was down to 19 cents and hogs to $3 and a quarter, and there was simply no cash moving on the Ridge Road at all. Ephraim Cold Iron was 30 pounds lighter that winter than he had been the winter before, and the interest was due on the 80 acres they had bought in $89.62.40, payable at the bank on the 1st of February. They did not have $62. They had 310 gallons of sorghum in the cellar in 2 barrels and a row of jugs. Sabra Cold Iron hauled 240 gallons of it to Ollie Trebu's father at the store at Eubank over 5 trips in January in a spring wagon, and old man Trebu took it at 22 cents on account, because he could sell syrup to people who could not buy sugar, and he wrote her a due bill, and she carried the due bill to the bank, and the bank took it, because the bank at that time would have taken almost anything that a man could eat. The interest was paid on the 30th of January, 19 days after she had begun hauling. Nobody ever knew that but Ephraim and old man Trebu, and Ephraim was 9 years in the ground by 1912, and old man Trebu was a year behind him. His son Ollie, who sold the sugar with the scoop, had been 14 years old that winter and had helped unload the barrels and had no idea in the world what he was unloading. So when Sabra Cold Iron said she wanted one sweet thing on the place that did not come on a train, what she was actually saying, in the compressed way that old people say things they have already thought all the way through, was that she had once paid a bank with a crop nobody wanted, and she had never afterward been able to make herself believe that a market was a permanent feature of the world. Now here is the part that nobody in Otter Fork Township saw, because it did not look like anything, and because the whole of it happened in a loft. Every September, when the cane came ripe, Sabra Cold Iron walked her 6 acres before the cutting began, and she went down the rows with a ball of red carpet warp in her apron pocket, and she tied a length of red yarn around the stalk of every head she meant to keep. She was not choosing the biggest heads. Anybody would choose the biggest heads. She was choosing for 4 things at once, and she had been doing it since her 2nd year on that ridge, when a seedsman at the county fair had spent 40 minutes explaining to a 20-year-old woman something he assumed she would forget. She chose for early ripening, because on a ridge in southern Indiana the frost can come on the 25th of September or it can come on the 25th of October, and a cane that is not ready when the frost comes is a cane that makes bitter syrup. She chose for a thick, sound stalk that would stand up in a September wind instead of going down flat and rotting in the row. She chose for the juice, which she tested by cutting a joint and chewing it, and after 40 years of chewing cane joints, she could tell you within a point what a stalk would make. And she chose against any stalk that had thrown suckers or gone red at the joint or shown the least sign of the blight that came through in '98. The red yarn stalks were cut last and cut separately, and the heads were carried up to the barn loft on a hay ladder and hung head down from wires strung between the rafters in bunches of a dozen. And in December she threshed them by hand over a barrel with a stick and cleaned the seed in a fanning mill her father had owned and put it in stone jars with a lid and a weight on it against mice. 43 years of that. 1974 to 1917. Not a bought seed on the place since 1881. What she had by 1917 was not early amber anymore, whatever the seed catalogs would have called it. It was a strain that belonged to that bench above that spring on that ridge and to no other place on the earth. It came ripe in 104 days. It stood in wind. It made close to 200 gallons an acre in a fair year, when the printed books said 140 was good. And it was the only sorghum seed in quantity in that end of the state, and not one soul in Otter Fork Township, including the woman who had made it, thought of that fact as anything but housekeeping. The sugar began to go in the spring of 1917, and almost nobody noticed, because it went the way water goes out of a pond in a dry August, an inch at a time, and everybody who noticed said something about it, and then thought about something else. Cuba was where the sugar came from. Cuba and Louisiana, and in 1917 the ships that had been carrying Cuban sugar to New York began instead carrying other things to other places, and the ones that still carried sugar had begun to be sunk. Refined granulated went from 5 3/4 cents to 7 cents that spring and to 8 1/2 by August. And the newspapers explained it every week in terms of tonnage, and the government explained it in terms of duty, and Ollie Trabue explained it to his customers in terms of the wickedness of jobbers, which is how a storekeeper explains everything. Dr. Emmett Sly, in his capacity as county food administrator, nailed up the first sugar poster on the post at the Eubank Crossroads on the 18th of June. It asked people, in polite type, to be sparing. In November, the month the wagon came for the mill, the ration recommendation was 3 pounds a person a month, and it was still a recommendation. In January of 1918, the county was put on certificates for anything above a household lot. By the middle of May, the figure had come down to 2 pounds a person a month, and Ollie Trabue's barrel was standing empty in the corner of the store with a scoop lying in the bottom of it, and he had begun keeping what little he could get under the counter for the doctor, the preacher, and 2 women with sick children, which is a thing that will make a man unpopular faster than dishonesty will. The pinch that broke it was not coffee, and it was not cake. It was canning. In a hill county in June, a woman puts up fruit. Cherries in June, blackberries and raspberries in July, peaches and plums in August, apples and grapes into September. And every quart of it in that era went into the jar with sugar. And a family that did not put up 300 or 400 quarts did not eat right in February. In June of 1918, the cherries came on heavy in every dooryard in Otter Fork Township, and there was no sugar to be had for them at any price, and women stood in their kitchens in the middle of a fine crop of fruit, knowing perfectly well it was going to fall on the ground and rot. And on the 14th of June, 1918. A bulletin came down to Dr. Sly from the State Food Administration with the rest of the week's mail, and it contained one paragraph about the use of syrups in home canning, and it named, in a list of 3, sorghum. He read it twice, standing at the post office window. Then he got his buggy and drove 7 miles up Sedge Ridge. He found her in the cane patch, hoeing. The stand of it that morning was as thick and as green as anything in that county, 6 acres of it up past her waist on the 14th of June, in rows so straight they made a man want to look down them. On ground that had grown nothing but cane since Grant was in office, and that she had put manure on every second year of her life. "Sabra," he said, and did not get down, "how much of this is there?" 6 acres, she said, same as always. "And how much will 6 acres make?" She leaned on the hoe and looked at it for a while, which was not for effect. She was counting. "If it does not turn dry in August," she said, "and if I get help enough to cut it, and if the frost holds off to the middle of October, it will make 900 to 1,000 gallons. "But you did not drive 7 miles up a ridge to ask me that." "No," he said. "I drove up here to ask you if you have got seed." There was a long quiet in which a doctor sat in a buggy and a woman stood in a cane row, and both of them, at more or less the same moment, understood the whole size of the thing. She had 184 bushels of cleaned sorghum seed in stone jars and grain sacks in the loft of that barn, which was every head she had saved and threshed since the fall of 1914, because a stone jar in a cold loft will hold seed for 4 years, and she had never had a reason to throw any of it out. In an ordinary spring, sorghum seed was worth about $1.50 a bushel and mostly got fed to chickens. In the spring of 1918 there was not a pound of sweet sorghum seed to be bought between Indianapolis and Louisville. Every seed house in 3 states had sold out by the first week of April to men in Kentucky and Tennessee and southern Illinois who had reached the same conclusion at the same time, which is what a shortage is. And her 184 bushels sat in a loft on a ridge road with mouse weights on the lids. She sold it that summer and the following spring, and she sold it 2 ways. To the seed house at Louisville that wired her, and then sent a man, and then sent a second man, she sold 184 bushels at $8 the bushel, which was the price they named, not the price she named. And that came to $1,472. To any man out of Otter Fork or Grassy Fork or Salt Lick Township who came up her lane with a sack. She sold seed enough to plant his patch at $2 the bushel, which was near enough what it had cost her to grow it, and she sold 41 bushels that way and did not put it in the reckoning at all. And there were 9 men in that number who had been on Harlan Frisbee's wagon in November. Not one of them said anything about the wagon. Neither did she. Gib Naylor was the 7th of them, and he stood in her barn lot with an empty grass sack in his hand and looked at the mill for a while and then said, "Well," and she said, 3 bushels will do you for 4 acres if the ground is warm when you drill it," and that was the entire conversation between those 2 people on that subject in that lifetime. The making of it began on the 11th of September, 1918, and it ran 29 days, and it was the hardest month of work that woman ever did. Cane cannot be hurried, and cane cannot wait. A stalk is ready when the seed in the head is hard enough that a thumbnail will dent it but not crush it, and from that day you have about 2 weeks before the juice starts to go off. And if a frost catches it standing, you have 3 days to get every stalk on the ground, or the syrup will taste of the frost forever. Every stalk has to be stripped of its blades before it is cut, which is done by walking the row and knocking the leaves off both sides with a wooden paddle, and it is the worst work on a farm, because the edge of a cane blade will cut a wrist like a piece of tin, and there is no way to do it but with your arms up. Then the head comes off with a knife. Then the stalk comes off at the ground with the same knife. Then it is loaded and hauled, and it must be ground within a day of cutting. and the juice must be in the pan within 4 hours of grinding, or it will sour, and there is nothing on this earth to be done with soured cane juice. She had Curtis Ammerman and his brother, and 2 men from Salt Lick, and, in the last 11 days, 4 boys and 3 women from families who were paying in work for their milling. The mill sat under its shake roof with a mule on the sweep, walking a circle it had walked every September of its life. And the 3 rollers took the stalks 2 and 3 at a time and put out a thin green juice that ran down a wooden trough through a doubled cloth strainer into a settling barrel. And out of the far side of the mill came the crushed bagasse in a mat, which went on the wagon and out to the field, because she had never in 40 years put a pound of that ground back without giving it something. The furnace was rock and clay with a firebox at one end and a chimney at the other, and a sheet iron evaporating pan on top of it 11 feet long and 30 inches wide with baffles in it, and the juice went in green at the high end and came out amber at the low end, and everything that mattered happened in between, and it happened in her hands. Green scum rises the whole first hour. If it is not taken off, it cooks back into the syrup, and the syrup is bitter and cloudy, and no store will take it. She skimmed with a long-handled tin skimmer, with holes punched in it, standing at the pan, hour after hour, in September heat, with a wood fire under 11 feet of iron 3 feet in front of her, and the skimmings went in a hole 30 steps away that was covered with boards, because uncovered skimmings will draw every fly in the township and will make a hog drunk and sick if he gets at them fermented. And the finish is a judgment, not a measurement. There was a spindle in a glass tube on the shelf, and she used it, but she did not trust it, and what she trusted was the way the syrup came off the edge of the skimmer when she lifted it and turned it. It runs off in a stream when it is not ready. It runs off in 2 heavy drops that come together into a sheet when it is ready. Between those 2 things is about 90 seconds, and if you are late, it will scorch or sugar in the jug by Christmas, and if you are early, it will ferment and blow the corks out. 940 gallons of her own, off 6 acres, in 29 days. It was the best crop that bench ever made. But her own crop was the smaller half of it. Because the whole county had planted cane in the spring of 1918, a good deal of it out of her own stone jars, and in September the whole county discovered what it had forgotten in 15 years, which is that a cane crop is not a crop until it has been through a mill. And there was one mill. They came up Sedge Ridge from the 11th of September to the 9th of October, in a line that was on some mornings 11 wagons long, from Otter Fork and Grassy Fork and Salt Lick and twice from over in the next county, loaded with stripped cane, and they waited their turn in the lane with their teams unhitched and tied to the fence. And there was a kettle of coffee going in her yard for 29 days straight, because she was not going to have men standing in her lane with nothing. She milled and boiled 2,642 gallons of syrup for other people that season. Some of those men had never stripped a stalk of cane in their lives, and it showed in what came off their wagons. And she took it anyway and said nothing about it, and sent every one of them home in the evening with his own syrup in his own jugs, and his team fed. The custom was the toll, and the toll on that ridge had always been 1 gallon in 5 when the mill did the whole job. She cut it to 1 in 6 on the second day without announcing it, because she looked at the line in her lane and did the arithmetic on what the toll would take out of a family's winter. On that basis, she took 462 gallons in toll out of the runs of the men who chose to toll. And for the men who wanted every gallon of their own syrup and would rather pay cash, she charged 15 cents the gallon boiled. And she boiled 2,180 gallons on that arrangement. The syrup itself sold at a price nobody on that ridge had ever seen or ever expected to see. Sorghum had been 35 and 40 cents the gallon in that county for 20 years. In the fall of 1918, a jobber out of Seymour was standing at the Eubank Depot paying $1.35 the gallon in 10-gallon kegs, and would have paid more, and did pay $1.50 for the 68 gallons of the 1917 making that she had held back in the cellar all year, and that was a year old and better for it. She sold to the jobber, and she sold to Ollie Trabue at the same price she gave the jobber, and she sold 22 gallons off her back porch to women who came up the ridge with a bucket and $1.35 in a handkerchief, because their cherries were on and they had no sugar, and she wrote every one of those in the book. And the cane seed that was not sold for seed, 310 bushels of it threshed off the 6 acres and off the heads she did not save, went for poultry feed at $1.30 the bushel to a feed dealer at Eubank, who had never bought a bushel of it in his life, and who had 2 hen houses in the county bidding against each other for it. Because corn was war corn, and everything that a chicken could eat had gone up with it. She kept the account in a school tablet on the kitchen table, in pencil, in a small upright hand, the way she had kept it every year since 1882. This is what the tablet said for the 12 months from the 1st of December, 1917, to the 1st of December, 1918. Syrup of her own making, 940 gallons at $1.35. $1,269. Toll syrup taken on custom milling, 462 gallons at $1.35. $623.70. Cane seed sold to the seed house at Louisville, 184 bushels at $8. $1,472. Boiling done for cash, 2,180 gallons at 15 cents. $327. Syrup of the 1917 making, held over, 68 gallons at $1.50. $102. Cane seed sold for feed, 310 bushels at $1.30. $403. $4,196.70. To put that number where it belongs, you have to hold it up against the county it came out of. A hired man on that ridge in 1918 made $35 a month and his dinner. Gib Naylor's 320 acres of the best bottom land in Otter Fork Township, tomatoes and corn in a very good war year, with war prices under everything, cleared him something over $5,000. And he had 4 men and 2 boys and 11 head of horses and mules to do it with. Sabra Cold Iron made $4,196.70 off 6 acres, a loft full of seed, a mule, a rock furnace, and 11 feet of sheet iron that a committee had put on a scrap list 10 months before. She paid Curtis Ammerman and the rest of the help $640 of it before the leaves were down. The rest of it went, in November of 1918, into 110 acres of adjoining ridge and bottom that came up at a sheriff sale, and into a new roof on the barn, and $1,100 of it went into war savings stamps and Liberty bonds, which she bought at the Eubank Bank on a Thursday morning with Harlan Frisbee standing at the desk behind her as a member of the loan committee, and neither of them said one word about a wagon. The price did not hold. Of course it did not hold. The war ended on the 11th of that same November, and the ships went back to Cuba, and in 1920 the sugar market did the thing that is still remembered in the trade, going to 22 cents a pound in May and to 4.5 cents by December. And after that, there was granulated sugar in every store in Indiana in any quantity a woman wanted at a price that no syrup on earth could compete with. Sorghum went to 70 cents the gallon in 1920, and to 50 cents in 1921, and to 38 cents in 1923. Every one of the cane patches that had been planted in the spring of 1918 out of her stone jars was gone by 1922. Gib Naylor's went back to corn in 1920. The mill that a farmer at Grassy Fork had bought second-hand out of Kentucky in the excitement of that autumn was sold for junk in 1924, and this time it really did go on a wagon. Hers turned every September for another 15 years. She never made $4,000 again, and she never expected to, and never said one word to suggest she had. The Sentinel came out and interviewed her in December of 1918 and ran it under a headline about the sweetest 6 acres in the county, and the piece is mostly wrong about the figures and gets her husband's name wrong. But it has one sentence in it that is hers, and it was her answer to the young man's question about how she had known. "I did not know anything," she said. "I kept a thing that had quit paying, and I kept the seed for it, and I did that for so long that I had forgotten I was doing it, and then one year the country wanted it back." She died in 1934 at 80 years of age in the room she had come to as a bride, and the last cane she made was in the fall of 1932, and it was 91 gallons off 2 acres, because 2 acres was what she could still handle. Vesta came down from Indianapolis and sold the farm to the Ammermans in 1935. Curtis Ammerman put the 6 acres on the bench back into cane in 1939 and made syrup on that same rock furnace all through the Second War, when sugar was rationed again with books and stamps and everybody remembered, and there is a photograph in the county historical rooms at Eubank of a man standing at an evaporating pan with a long-handled skimmer in his hand, and the card under it says 1943. The mill itself is still under a roof on that ridge. It has not turned since 1951. The rollers are 3 inches deep in rust, and the sweep pole is gone, and the frame has settled into the ground on the north side, and a man on the county board proposed in 1968 that it be hauled off, and was voted down for no better reason than that it had been there a long time, which is very nearly the reason it was there in the first place. 9 men rode up a ridge road on a bright morning in November to take away a piece of iron that had not been fashionable in 15 years, and they were right about every single thing they said. There was no market for it. It was slow work. The sugar was cheaper and whiter, and came on a train. Every figure Ollie Trabue laid out on that counter with his finger was correct, and it had been correct every year for 30 years, and it went on being correct for another 30 years after 1918. It was wrong for 14 months. That was all it needed to be, and the only person in that county who was still holding the thing on the 14th month was a woman who had paid a bank with a crop nobody wanted in the winter of 1894, and had never afterward been able to believe that a market was a permanent feature of the world, and who had been tying red yarn around the best heads in her cane patch every September for 43 years. Not because she was waiting for anything, but because that was the September work, and she had never seen a good reason to stop.